Welcome to the Built Not Born podcast presented by Edge Leadership Academy. I'm your host, David Kitchen, and every week I'm going to be having conversations with some of the top leaders in their fields to figure out what built them into the leaders they are today and what we can all take away from their journey. Thanks for joining us on this podcast. If you like what you hear, please share, like, and leave a review so we can continue to bring you more content like this. Also, make sure you join us on our website, www.edgeleadershipacademy.com, for a ton of free content and resources for leaders and those wanting to be leaders. And be sure to follow us on social media. I'm fired up to be part of this project, and I'm really looking forward to getting to work. Leaders are built, not born. Guys, welcome back to another episode of the Built Not Born podcast. We are joined once again by Coach Rebekah Gold for episode 3 of her 3-part installment, doing a deep dive into leadership. If you guys haven't had a chance, please check out episodes 1 and 2. They were absolutely awesome. I have a ton of notes that I've been poring over this holiday break. So I'm fired up to see what Coach Gold brings to the stage on part 3. If you missed out on part 2, we did talk a ton about self-awareness. We talked about habits, leading from the middle, the mentor-mentee relationship. There was just a lot of things in there that we easily could have spent 2 to 3 hours talking about, and then we kind of cut it a little bit short just to make sure that everyone had a chance to digest that. So if you guys have time, make sure you go back, give those a listen, make sure you get the most out of this 3-part series. So today we're going to talk a little bit about motivation to lead, leadership and culture, that relationship, and then we'll end with some wildcard questions for Coach Gold so everyone can get a chance to kind of get to know her a little bit off the script as well. So Coach, we'll jump right into this thing. I'm going to fire questions right off the jump. So here we go. Here comes a big one. How do we identify the motivation to be a leader within other interns, staff members, people that you get around that you're like, hey, this person has the potential to be a leader and potentially is motivated to be that? What are some things that you see as those identifying pieces?
I think it comes back already to things that we've talked about in the previous episodes with helping or finding out their why, like what are they, or why are they doing what they're doing? So for your interns, why do they want to be a strength coach? First of all, why do they want to be a collegiate strength coach? Like getting very specific into the environment. This is a specific population. Why do you want to work with this population as opposed to pro or high school or younger youth? You might ask about this specific place, and this could be for your athletes or for your interns or even your coworkers. I think this is an easy conversation that as you start to build trust and build a relationship with your coworkers or your boss, you're finding out, why did they come to this place in the first place? For some people, I think for a lot of people, it's happenstance, or this is just where I got the job. But you never know, for a lot of the athletes, it's, well, this is where mom and dad went. And, I really wanted to, I've always been a fan of this place. So it was like, it was a big deal for me to be here type of thing. So getting really specific and helping them figure out what their why is. And as you are able to ask those questions and you're listening to their responses, you're going to help them increase their self-awareness and maybe form it into a way that says, okay, hey, this person, does want to be the leader. They do care about the people around them, and they care to influence people in a certain way. Or maybe not. Maybe this person's motivation is more about a paycheck, which is okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's okay to be driven by the reward that you get. But with that said, if you're not motivated by influencing the people around you, it's going to make that leadership task seem a whole different way. For one person, it's leadership is rewarding, and for other, it's a stressor.
Absolutely. And I think, I read a research article where they kind of laid out the antecedents to leadership and things that led up to that. And one of them was personality. The other one was leadership, self-efficacy, and then values. And then finally, quantity and quality of past leadership experiences. So those 4 things kind of came together, and I heard you hit on all of them in different ways within your answer. So we'll kind of break them into pieces, and let's dive into each one first. So everybody always says, the introvert extrovert argument, right? That introverts are not born leaders. Extroverts are more predisposed to leadership. I don't find that true. But I'd be interested to hear, when you look at certain personality traits within people, what are some things that you see that lend themselves to leadership?
Well, leadership again is all about influence. So I think people who see themselves as an extrovert or are more comfortable speaking, that verbal type of leadership or charisma maybe comes a little easier to them. And that's something that they find rewarding is, people liking them and being able to make people laugh or just being able to influence people. I mean, that's rewarding for some people. And that extrovert is somebody who that might come a little easier to. Your introverts, though, they might be able to lead by example a little bit better. A lot of times, somebody who isn't as comfortable speaking in front of people, they might be way better at observing and seeing and listening. So they'll lead in different ways. So kind of like you said, I think you know, I don't think that because you're an extrovert that makes you a better leader or introvert. I agree with you 100%. The way that you go about leading naturally is going to come different. As that leadership matures, you start to make decisions and choices and choose to lead in certain ways. And those ways, if you continue to mature and educate yourself with that leadership, those ways are going to flex with your population and who you're trying to influence.
Absolutely. And that's what I was just going to say. I love that you hit on that. As you grow, it's almost like you start to add more things to your toolbox and then you become more comfortable leading in different ways. And I think, like you said, that extrovert, when you first step into it, yeah, you're more comfortable in front of the crowd. You're more comfortable, holding court, if you will, and talking to a group of people. But that doesn't necessarily lend you to leadership as it's truly defined. Just because you can talk to a lot of people doesn't make you a leader. And I think at times, especially in our student athlete population and younger people, before you truly have an understanding of what you're looking for in a leader, that loudest voice in the room ends up being the de facto leader, and they just get in charge because they're the one that's willing to speak, versus that introvert that kind of gets looked over. And it's like, hey, maybe that's the person that you should be following because they're modeling the behavior. They're modeling what you're looking for. And so I think that's a huge piece of it. And so for anyone listening to this, that is that introverted side, it's completely okay. And I think that changes throughout your lifespan as well. You may be super extroverted as a younger person. And as you get older, you become more self-reflective and introverted, introspective in nature. And you kind of sway a little bit on that pendulum or a little bit on that continuum. And your leadership skills will change within that. I think, for me personally, when I first got into the field and got into coaching, I was extremely extroverted. I was extremely, comfortable talking to people, comfortable being in front and holding court, like I said. And then as I kind of grew and matured in my own right, I felt like it was less about what I said and more about what I did. And so that kind of grew over time. So I think that's a huge piece. My follow-up question to you would be, as you grow and as you kind of flex your leadership, what are the things that you would want to hold on to so that you don't lose yourself? You don't want to get into that leadership role and completely lose your values and who you are. So what are some things that you would want to hold on to as that leadership kind of traits and those leadership styles do mature as you mature?
I actually was just having this conversation with one of my interns who is struggling to find who he is as a coach. And you see it because he tries to mirror what he thinks he should be looking like or acting like. So he'll see me be successful in the way I coach. So then he tries to do the same things I do, which makes complete sense. That's logical thought process, but it's not him. And because it's not him, it comes off disgenuine and not authentic and doesn't allow for a trusting relationship to be built. So my advice for anybody who's trying to figure out how to flex their leadership, but hold on to themselves, what makes you you? That's the question you need to be able to answer. What are the values and characteristics that define, I shouldn't say define, but that characterize you as a coach, that no matter what your style of leadership is, you're always going to be able to see these things reflected. So at the Citadel, Coach Donnell, the first thing he taught me was the 3 T's, and I still use them to this day: tempo, technique, and teamwork. And at first, that was more of like, okay, here's what you're going to see in the weight room. We're going to work at a high tempo. We're going to put the highest quality over quantity with, emphasizing technique. And we're going to work together as a team. Easy way to kind of describe what you're going to see when you come into that weight room. But the more I think about it, those describe what you're going to see in me, no matter if I'm having an up day or a down day. And by that, I mean, some days when we're in the weight room, depending on the context, I want the music to be loud. I want energy to be high. Maybe it's a max out day. So we're going to have this, really high stimulating environment. And some days we have a recovery day. So I'm going to put on yoga music and we're going to stretch and I'm going to teach you how to breathe. That's a lot of that's a huge difference in environment. But no matter what, you're going to see us working with a sense of urgency to be productive in our specific goal. Right. You're going to see an emphasis on technique. I'm going to coach the crap out of anything. It doesn't matter what we're doing. I'm coaching the crap out of it. And we're always going to emphasize teamwork, communicating, caring for our teammates, and holding each other accountable. Those things don't change just because the way I'm leading the session changes. So if you are somebody who's trying to figure out how to flex your leadership, you have to increase your self-awareness and really find out, what are those things that you're going to see no matter what you're coaching and how you have to flex. It'll always come down to these specific qualities.
Absolutely. And I think we're seeing it so much right now, just to relate it to the bigger picture in the real world. In my mind, I think about it like peacetime, wartime, right? You lead a certain way in peacetime when you're able to, and then when wartime comes, you have to lead a certain way. So I think we're seeing that right now with COVID, right? A lot of people, the environment has changed and the market has changed. If you're in business, the market has changed. The brick and mortar stores and people being able to come into your business is not there. And so if you're a sales rep or if you're a sales manager, the way you lead your people has to change a little bit too, because now you're leading remotely, you're leading in a different environment. So I think what you just said, those values need to be there because now you feel comfortable making that change. When the environment shifts, you don't get rocked. You don't get all shook because you can lead within that. So like you just said, if it's a max day, you're perfectly comfortable being in that environment and you're perfectly comfortable with the music turned up, whistles going, blowing, chalk flying, the whole deal. But you're also comfortable on those yoga days where it's time to count our breaths and it's time to slow things down. And there's still that attention to detail because that's a cornerstone of who you are as a coach. And so that's still going to be done. And the tempo might have changed, but you're still paying attention to the tempo. You didn't throw it out the window, right? And so if you're a sales manager and you talk about, we're going to have relationship-based sales, we're going to have these things. Well, just because COVID is happening, now you have to be more aggressive to make your bottom line. Does that mean we throw relationships out? And I think that's where leaders are being tested right now. Can you hold your values in times of war? Can you hold your values when the stimulus on the outside is a little bit higher and now you're being pressured? So I think that comes over time with maturity and with experiences. I know for me, the first time I was involved in a football max day, I was like, my head's spinning, like everything was happening so fast. And I'm like, okay, what is going on right now? And then over time, it's like, oh no, I can still be me within these constructs and these constraints of the situation. And I can put my stamp on it no matter what, and that's a big growing point for a young leader as you start to stretch yourself. But that's only possible if you do stretch yourself, which leads us to our next point, which would be the leadership self-efficacy. Where do you find is kind of that line between stretching yourself and maybe taking on too much at a point where you're not quite ready for that? How do you find that balance?
I think the balance comes with your perspective of what you view as balance. So just because on the daily, you might not have 12 hours dedicated to home and 12 hours dedicated to work. What about within the week? What about within the month? What about within the in season, off season, the whole year? No, I don't get to see my family very often. But when I do go home, I get a pretty good chunk of time in May and a pretty good chunk of time in December/January, that when I'm there, I'm fully there. And so I really get to find, my quote unquote balance in the different seasons of the year. As a strength coach, when, in this environment, every year, the whole year is a year of firsts. It's not like you get into your routine in maybe you come in January. It's not like you get into a routine in January and you carry that routine all the way through the December of that year. That's not how it works. We have a off season, and then you have a summer, and then you have preseason, and then in season, and then postseason. And that postseason that's in December, that's the first time that you've experienced that postseason. So our whole year is a year of first. You don't get a second experience until a whole year later at that. So understanding your perspective of where balance is, I think, you have to really step back and see the picture or the pie as a whole, as opposed to the small chunk of maybe the holiday. Kind of like we were talking about earlier, like in the holidays, it's definitely more evident that you're not with your family or you're missing out on something that you want to miss out. But when you look at the grand scheme of things, what opportunities does that give you? A time to create your own traditions and a time to create new opportunities and experience new things. You got to just change your perspective when it comes to whatever balance is. And with that said, kind of coming full circle to, knowing where the line is between getting stretched too thin. I think it comes with experience. I mean, you have to experience things and you have to fail in order to learn. So it comes first with failure. It comes second with self-awareness and the debrief. That takes us back to a previous episode when we talked about the habit of debriefing so that you can increase self-awareness. If you failed, you have to go back and look at the things that led up to that failure so that you can identify them and not let them happen again. And then it also comes to the challenge. Are you going to let yourself, is the answer to that failure, don't let A, B, and C that led up to this, don't let those happen again? Or is the answer B, be better? Let those happen, but respond better this next time, type of thing. So again, just kind of I think it all comes back to that debrief and that self-awareness, because everybody's different. Everybody's going to be able to handle different things and choose to change their perspective in certain moments.
Definitely. So to unpack that a little bit further, because I think if I'm hearing you correctly, you're almost referring to like periodizing your own growth in that you want to, there's times to push, but then there's times to breathe, reflect, and then formulate the plan for the next big push, right? And that's kind of what I was hearing there. I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page with that, because to me, that makes a ton of sense. And when I do anything, from a self-growth and self-development standpoint, that's kind of the way I look at it, where I'm like, okay, hold your nose, here comes the cold water for the next, whatever, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever it may be. I'm going to push and I'm really going to grow and I'm going to see what happens. And I don't know if I'm ready for this or not, but I'll evaluate at the end of that time period and I'll make adjustments and then decide and go further. And I think that, if you approach things that way, you start to realize trends and you start to realize where you can, where you're excelling, and that you're probably better at it than you thought you were. Now, sometimes that's not true. Sometimes you go in and you fall flat on your face, and that's okay too. But I think you identify trends and you start to identify like, hey, if I put X, Y, and Z on my plate and I get pulled in this direction too far, I lose sight of D over here. And in our case, what we're talking right now was, if I put everything into my job, I lose connection with my family a little bit for a second. And that's a leadership thing. That's understanding how to balance things, because it's the same thing if you're running a multi-million-dollar business and you put all your emphasis into, future sales and future marketing and this and that, and you kind of lay off of R&D and research and developing new products. Well, now okay, if I stretch myself in these departments, I'm going to lose this. So I need to kind of circle back and pay attention to this as well. And then you start to find, like you said, through those debriefs and that self-awareness, okay, I know that when I get lost in the weeds over here, which I tend to do, I need to keep an eye over here because this is what's going to happen from it. And so, when it comes to taking on new roles, I think this is something that people need to stop and do, because I don't know if I don't want to speak for you, but I know for me personally, those first 6 to 8 months in a new job go by so fast, and you feel like you're drowning the whole time. And then sometimes it just runs into the next semester before you know it. And you never took time to reflect and look on what you did the first semester or the first 6 months in the job, and really take time to do that. And I thought that, at UNLV with Coach Manuel, that was something we did after my first 6 months there. We did it at 90 days and then we did it again at 6 months. And we sat down and we reflected on what happened for me. What did I see? Where did I grow? Where are things that I'm still missing? And I thought that kind of gave us a guide for where we would go in the future. And so I think, give me a little bit on your insight. Is that something that you do in those first, almost like the president, like the first 90 days, first 180 days? What do you get done? Where do we need to go?
I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think that in our field, we kind of complain about the lack of uh, definition of success in our field. How is our success defined, and how do we define our value as strength and conditioning coaches? Because you can't do it with wins and losses. Like a sport coach may or may not be judged for their wins and losses. You can't do that for strength coaches. And then it comes back to, well, we're not getting paid enough, so you have to define, how can we define this so we can get paid more, and blah blah blah. Yet we don't take the time to do evaluations, regular documented evaluations. So if you are the leader of a department or an internship program, like I am with my interns, we do a midterm evaluation and an end of the semester evaluation. With my sport coaches, I have a list of questions that I send them at the end of each semester, and they don't always fill it out. I can't force them to, but at least I'm asking for feedback at that standpoint, and it's regular and it's documented, because that way when I go upstairs and I need to ask for a raise because this, A and B happened, and I need some extra money in the bank, I could say, look, here's the evaluations that my sport coaches and my supervisors have given me. I'm doing more than is asked of me. Please, that can help you with your case.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't do, I think, as a lot of us tend to not be the type to sit at the computer and do the computer work and the documentation and the organization, because we want to be on the floor coaching and in the heat of things. As a leader of a department, it is your job and it is your responsibility to set your department up for success with these regular evaluations that are documented and that you can bring to the table and say they're doing their job and more. Mm-hmm. It's important to have that to protect your assistants. And that is one of those things that, previously we had talked about burnout a little bit. That's one of those things that can help prevent that can help, it gives you a chance to say thank you to your assistants and to reward them, for doing a good job. And maybe at the end of the year, you can go upstairs and, without your assistant knowing, ask to get them a raise. Like, look, here's their evaluations. They've been doing a really good job. Is there a way we can find them some extra money? Mm-hmm. And, if somebody receives, think about it. If you were to get your, you've had your regular paycheck month after month after month, and then all of a sudden 1 month comes in and there's a couple extra whatever on the end of that, on the end of the zeros or whatever it is, what better way to say thank you? Right. What better way to show your appreciation to your assistants who work their butts off every time? So I think that regular documented evaluation process is a big deal.
Yeah. And I think it goes both ways too, because I think as a leader, you grow it through those evaluations too. You start to realize what you're looking for in the people below you, and also where you're maybe missing as a leader. And I think the biggest question that I always loved being asked by Coach Manuel, and it was something that I then used when I started to have my own assistants, my own staffs, was the biggest question we always ended with was, what do I need to do more of? And he had about 4 or 5 questions that were like, what am I doing well? What do I need to do more of? What should I do less of? What can I do to make your job better? And I think, as a leader, sometimes we miss that piece of asking for feedback down the chain to get our own processes in order, and it's something, because a lot of times you're focused on the big picture. That's your job. You're supposed to be. But we also have to take care of our people and take care of the details. And sometimes those details get lost if you're not asking for that feedback. So I think those evaluations that you talk about are a huge piece for you to also grow your leadership, your self-efficacy, your self-belief in yourself as a leader, to hear that, because now you can grow off of those points and you can use those as jumping off points for your future, and you can double down on your strengths. Hey, if this person tells me I'm doing a great job connecting with him or her and I'm taking care of their people, okay, well, then I know I'm doing that well. Maybe I'm not doing a great job laying out clear expectations on actual projects. So that's something I need to get better at. And you can kind of self-evaluate. So it almost serves as kind of a microwave version of self-awareness for you, if you're willing to read it and look at it, right? And I think that's big as well. And I was watching, I don't know if you've seen it, Nick Saban and Bill Belichick, they did an Art of Coaching documentary on them. It was awesome. But Belichick, after his season with the Patriots, and we all know the NFL business doesn't stop. There's no down season for them. They're always going. But he takes time and he goes up to, I believe it's Nantucket or wherever, wherever multi-million-dollar people live. I'm not familiar with that type of lifestyle, but he goes on his boat, which I assume is probably a very nice and big boat. And he takes time and he does his evaluations out there. And he'll go out and do his staff evaluations. He'll do a fishing trip. He'll watch film. He'll do all these things. And then he comes back to the office refreshed and reinvigorated, ready for the next season. But he also used that time for self-reflection and self-awareness. And, ultimately, again, every year he feels like he comes back, and he said this in the documentary, I come back with 5 or 6 new ideas on things that I missed on, and 5 or 6 new ideas on things that I didn't realize I was doing so well at. And I think, in our culture, sometimes we're so quick to talk about what we don't do well, but we don't spend enough time looking at what we do well. And that is going to build your self-efficacy as well. It's focusing on your wins, focus on those things. And so I'd like to hear kind of your perspective on, evaluating yourself. What are some of the things? Do you spend more time on the positives or the negatives? And you can be honest with me here. Is it something that, you look to be super critical on yourself, or is it something where you give yourself a little bit of grace? Because I think sometimes people fall on either end of the spectrum with that.
Whenever I am doing my own self-evaluations, like using the podcast that we did previously for an example, I had to listen to both podcasts several times. Like, I was listening to them over and over and over again, because at first I'm picking at what I didn't like about what I was doing. And I'm like, oh, I didn't like this. I didn't like this. And I didn't like this. And pretty soon I noticed myself getting into this downward spiral of like, at the end of that spiral, I'm like, why am I even doing this? Like, am I even qualified to be doing this leadership podcast? Like, blah, 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 blah. And then I called up my brother and I had him listen to it, and his wife, and they're actually leaders in their own environments. He works as a salesman at an electrician company,
Mm-hmm.
and she's a high school teacher and coach. And the feedback that they gave me was, it was funny. It came down to like, just be confident. The content is good. Just be confident in what you're doing. And after I had that conversation with them, I went back and I listened to them again. And then all of a sudden I can see, oh yeah, I did do this pretty good. Or, oh, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. And all these other things. So I think don't just evaluate yourself for a task or something that you did just once. Maybe listen to it with focus on listening for some specific things. And then the next time you listen to it, listen for some other specifics. And then the next time, maybe it's different specifics. Because when you're focusing on specific things, you will find specific things.
Right.
And when, like, what am I evaluating myself on? That comes down to kind of those same qualities and characteristics that I value about myself that I want people to see no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's most important to you? No matter what you're doing, what do you want people to see, type of thing? And when you know those about yourself, then that gives you room to debrief with purpose.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And I think, sometimes we get so caught up because we're in it, whether you're, again, it doesn't matter the industry, you can be coaching or whatever, the intricacies of what you're doing. And it's great to hold yourself to a high standard, but I think we're so quick to jump on ourselves for the negatives. And we're so quick to almost get into, like you were just saying, that negative feedback loop where it's confirmation bias. You're looking for things, so you're going to find them. And then we start to question who we are, we start to waver, and negative things can come out of that. Versus if we look at this and we say, okay, for every negative I'm going to name a positive as well. Or if you're not into that whole balance thing, then maybe you do two negatives and one positive. But regardless, I think it's important to identify the positives of what you're doing and what's going well, and then how can you build upon that? How can you take that to the next level? And then what things do you need to fix? But I think if you don't honestly give yourself a little bit of grace of like, hey, okay, in the first 6 months, this was the first 6 months of me in deploying this new skill. Yeah, it sucked at times, but it doesn't mean I throw the skill out, right? You have to give yourself a little bit of grace. It's like, okay, I'm learning. Here's where I messed this up. Here's how I can build upon it. But again, it's like you said, you can't go into it and try and judge the whole pie every time. Like you have to go in and let's check. If we're talking about pies, let's talk about the texture first. How's the crust? Okay, the crust is there. What's going on with this? What's going on? And then you can start to build from it, from that standpoint. But I think, if you try and take it all on at once, it's daunting, and you get caught in these negative things and you're like, I suck. And then all of a sudden you're in this imposter syndrome feeling where you're like, I don't belong. Should I even be doing this? And I go through it as well. There's times where people raise an eyebrow at me. They're like, you're 28 years old and you're talking about leadership. What have you done? I'm like, well, I get, and then all of a sudden I'm thinking, I'm like, wait, am I qualified to do it? And then I sit back and you have to break it down. It's like, well, here's the reasons why, here's the reasons about this, here's the education that I've had, whatever it may be, to back it. And you start to break out of that imposter syndrome feeling. But it is there. If you try and judge the whole as a whole, nobody's capable of doing that. Nobody is. And so I would challenge everybody to be positive about your positives and start listing some of your strengths out as well, and see how quickly you feel a little bit better about your negatives, because now you can find ways to leverage your strengths into working on your negatives. And so I think that's a big piece of it as well. So Coach, I want to shift gears here and we'll talk about leadership and culture, because I think this interaction and this relationship between the two is so huge. So I'll have you just jump it off. I'm just going to give you a softball question and then we'll kind of go from there. Just give me your thoughts on the relationship between leaders and culture. What comes to mind? You can take a couple minutes and just spew it and let me know your thoughts on that. And then we'll build from that.
I think the first step here is to define those two, because I think that some people use them interchangeably, like, oh, like your culture, your leadership, blah, blah, blah. Like they'll in casual conversation, they get used interchangeably, and they're two very different things. Although very closely related, they are very, very different. And so as we kind of talked about earlier, leadership is about influence. And just because I think that there's a lot of people who are very influential, because if you have people following you, you're influencing them. And so we all have that in different aspects of our life. Now, culture is more is leadership on a cumulative platform. So leadership leads to, or the leadership of a group is going to lead to the culture of that group. And your culture is, I define culture as like the sights and the sounds and the emotions of the that characterize the environment when you walk into a certain place. And it's not characterized by the location, it's characterized by the group of people, and it's characterized by their habits. And just to reiterate, we talked about habits, being the routines of the people within that environment and the things that they do regularly over and over and over again. So with your culture being that, the leadership on exponential standpoint, leadership on steroids, what you see in your culture is a direct result of the leadership. So if you're seeing a bad culture, you need to look at the leadership. Now, that leadership can be using our teams as an example, you can look at your captains, but who is leading your captains? Who is, and then, so that's your assistant coaches. And then who's leading your assistant coaches? Your head coach. Whatever you're seeing at that level of what you would consider to be your team's culture, it's time to look in the mirror and ask why what are you doing that's influencing that? Because you are the influencer, and it's probably unintentional, but whatever you're doing is influencing that type of behavior down the chain. So now that we've kind of distinguished the two, I think the next step is learning how do we teach that? Like we've talked about before, it starts with an increase in self-awareness for yourself, but then you also need to lead your other leaders, lead down the chain to learn how to increase their own self-awareness. And I think that looks differently when you're working with maybe your staff members versus your athletes. Because with your athletes, I mean, you can say, sit here, we're going to talk about this, and you can teach them like classroom style. You can present topics and definitions, and you could do that with your staff as well. I don't think a lot of people are wanting to do that. I think it would be very helpful, but if you don't want to do that, a lot of that will come down to, what are your habits? Again, how are you leading by example? Talking about vulnerability. If you're more vulnerable, those you are leading will also be more vulnerable. They'll be more genuine and authentic in your relationship with them, but also they see the success of that relationship, and then they want to create that relationship with those that they lead. So it works down the chain in that manner. When it comes to teaching your athletes about it, I think it comes down to 4 steps. Like you have to define it. And you kind of have to spoon feed the information, right? Because our athletes, it's not like you're going to sit down with your athlete for an hour and, with them as a group and say, okay, class, here we go. You don't have time to do that. But I think one of the problems in athletics is this idea of like buzzwords, like buzzwords meaning culture, commitment, intensity, people, I'm motivated, I'm inspired. Your athletes say they're committed. Are you committed to this? Yes, I'm committed. Okay, what does committed mean? And they look at you like, they can't define it. They don't actually know. So the first step is that you have to define whatever those buzzwords are. And from there, after you've defined it, you have to talk about why it's important. Why should they care about what this means? Why should they care about why we're investing our time in this thing? With my teams at the end of their lift, I'll have a 10-minute Think Right Tuesday where I bring up a concept. We talk about, the definition of it. We talk about why it's important and why they should invest their time and why they should make sacrifices for this. Like, that's why we're talking about it, because it's important. And these are the reasons why. Help them, give them a self-check tool. You are doing this if this. You are not doing this if you see this, or, some sort of strategy or tool. And then at the end, you're connecting the dots, right? Now you're summarizing, saying, okay, remember, we're doing all of these things from a self-awareness standpoint because you care about your teammates, because we're working towards a team goal. Now, for those of you who are not in the team environment or with coaches like that, like I said, that's an easy way. That's an easy 4 steps to implement with any group of people that you're leading.
Awesome. And you hit on so many things in there that align perfectly with what I believe. So we'll start unpacking this from the beginning. You talked about, cultures within the organization, right? So you have, and we'll use the team example. We'll stick with that. So you have within your team, you have your coaching staff, your support staff, your student athletes, et cetera, right? So there's different cultures within that. I think, in my opinion, and you can correct me if you have a different one here, but I think the closer that all those cultures are in the way they operate, I think the more efficient and the more effective your whole organization is. So if you have a culture of, and we'll use accountability since it is one of those, everyone loves that buzzword. if there's a culture of accountability within the support staff, and I'm talking athletic trainers, strength and conditioning, academic advising, all those outside kind of fringe pieces that work within the organization. If there's a culture of accountability in there, and there's no culture of accountability within the coaching staff itself, the actual sport coaching staff, then there's a disconnect there. And that disconnect is seen because now the student athletes are experiencing two different things, right? So it would be the same thing as if we're in an organization and we're selling, we use the office, if we're selling paper, we're Dunder Mifflin, and I'm selling paper, and there's a culture of accountability within my regional sales team, but not within my national sales team. Well, then who do you listen to? Because then it becomes, well, mom told me I could do it and dad lets me do it. You know what I mean? And now you have this situation where the kid's jumping on the bed and he's saying, well, daddy told me I could. And you're like, okay, this is a fracture within that. And so I think as a leader, you have to do a great job of managing. Those cultures are going to exist within their own. There's always going to be, smaller ecosystems within your large scale organization. That's part of it. There's going to be your freshman class is going to have their own culture. Your sophomore class is going to have their own culture. Your junior class, so on up. You have to manage those things so that they align within the group culture. You have to, because if you start to see fractures within those, it's just going to lead. It's like poking holes in a boat, right? Every little one pokes another hole, and then sooner or later the whole thing pops and now you got a big problem. So I think as a leader, you have to do a great job to acknowledge that and understand that there's going to be individual, I don't want to say cliques because you don't want to create cliques, but there's going to be individual ecosystems within that where there's interactions. And you have to manage all of those. So if you're the top level leader, and we'll use the team example, if you're the head coach, there has to be continuity in the way that your student athletes are dealt with from a support staff side, from a coaching staff side, from a within team, accountability side. All those things have to be on the same page if you want true accountability. Because in my opinion, and this leads to the second point that you talked about, you have the leadership, which sets your culture. I truly believe that your leadership sets your culture. Your culture defines your habits, because that your culture defines what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. Your behaviors within that defines your habits. Your habits are going to define your results at the end of the day. So if you're a head coach and you're at the top of that chain, you're the leadership, and you're not managing the habits that are going on within each individual culture, you're going to miss out on results that you could have. And I think sometimes that gets missed. And coaches kind of are so focused on what I need to get done and what we need to get done on the field or on the court or in the pool. And they miss on some of those other pieces. And then they wonder why, X, Y, Z result doesn't show up. Now, am I saying you're not going to win because of these things? Not necessarily, but could you win more because of it? Yes. If it's all on the same page? Yes, 100%. And if you look at those great cultures, in books like Good to Great or the Culture Code or any of those things, it's extremely consistent across departments and across the organization in the way things are handled. And I think that that's a huge, huge piece of it. So I'd be interested to hear kind of on your side, like, what are some things that we should be doing as leaders to manage those individual cultures, right? Because even for you as a strength coach, you have your internship department. Those interns have their own culture within themselves. There's always a pecking order. There's a hierarchy. There's a leader within them. And it's great to see that. How do you manage that to make sure that everybody is following the same vision?
Okay, so first and foremost, it comes down to really great communication. Communicating those standards and expectations up front. And we've talked about that before. Here's how I expect you to operate. Here's your job. Get it done. Within your tasks or however you go about getting it done, these are the values of us as a group. And when you express what we value as a group, that empowers those smaller, what was the word you used? Kind of ecosystems.
Yeah.
It empowers them to make decisions because they can make those decisions based off of those values, that make decisions that align with the values of the overall goal and department and who we want to be and who we want to represent ourselves to be. It's our brand. Here is our brand. No matter what, in this strength and conditioning department, we are going to work tempo, technique, and teamwork, no matter what. Now make your decisions based off of those things. Now, is it absolutely 100% foolproof? No, but it is definitely more consistent than just like, hey, don't make any bad decisions. Good luck. Because it's better than micromanaging. Because especially I think when we have a lot of responsibilities, as you will, if you are the head of a department or a organization, you'll get distracted by managing so much that you forget to lead. And because those are two different things. And if you allow those distractions to overtake and take away from your leadership, it takes away from the trust that your subordinates, or I don't know if that's a great word to use, but that your employees and your athletes or your assistants or whoever it is, takes away from the trusting relationship that you've built with them. And at the end of the day, everything comes back to trust. It's about consistency. I have to trust that this is what I'm going to get from this person every single day. I have to trust. They said that they care about me, so I have to trust that the decisions that they make are aligned with what's going to be best for me. And when it comes to, there's so much that goes into just building trusting relationships, but keeping your commitments, under promise and over deliver. That's an easy way to stay consistent. Like I said earlier, clarifying expectations, having integrity. Don't gossip. Don't or apologize when you do something wrong, or when you mess up or something didn't work out the way you expected it to. All of those are little things that you can do to fuel that trusting relationship, and then that will work its way kind of up or down the chain, I should say.
Coach, I'm so glad that you hit that. I was so excited over here listening to that, because you hit exactly what I wanted to bring out. And that was the values piece, that your values should manage every single ecosystem within, and every single culture within your culture, within your large scale organization. Your values need to be reflected in everything that you do and in all of your habits, no matter who's doing them. So if one of your habits and one of your values is attention to detail, and you're the head basketball coach or head football coach or whatever, and the athletic trainer forgets or doesn't have any tape with them, or tapes incorrectly, that needs to be addressed, because that is your value. Your value is attention to detail. Those types of things cannot be overlooked just because it's kind of outside your immediate culture. It all has to be addressed. And so I think when you hit on that piece, if you guys are listening to this, go back and listen to that again, because that is one of the most influential things you will hear as a leader. Your values need to be reflected throughout your entire organization, from the janitor to the CEO, from the head coach to the student manager. Everybody needs to exemplify your values. Otherwise, they are not your values. So stop using the buzzwords. And I'm getting on a tangent here. I'm getting fired up. Stop using the buzzwords of tough, committed, attention to detail, whatever your hashtags are. Stop using them if you're not living them. And if everybody in your organization is not living them, then they're just words on a wall. They're words on a t-shirt. They mean nothing. And so that, to me, what you said there with the value piece, those are your stated culture. That's what you say you're about. Your experience culture is what goes on a day-to-day. What does it actually look like? What does your culture look like in real life? Because if you say that you're about these things and it's not going on, there's a disconnect, and you will never be elite as long as that disconnect exists. So you need to find a way to bridge that gap. And that way is exactly what you just said: communication, clear expectations, feedback, trust. Okay, all these things that people want to avoid, and they just want to throw a slogan on the wall and say, we are this. No, you're not. Until you daily lay a brick, you are not that thing. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I'm done. Coach, the other big one that you hit on there that I loved, and this will be an all-time quote from this podcast: don't get so distracted managing when you need to be leading. That is huge. And I think that happens so many times when people have so much on their plate, where their only answer is to take control over things that they can take control of, which is micromanagement, versus leading the big picture. Empower your people to make the right decisions, and then trust them to do so. And that piece right there is exactly what you said. Don't get distracted managing when you should be leading. And I think that, in order to do that, you have to do what you said, which is build trust, build relationships, build the values to a point where you know that these people believe in your values. these people are free to make their own decisions within it because your values will be exemplified through their actions. And you don't have to worry about it then, right? And so I think, Coach, we could have just recorded that little 5-minute segment and I would have been completely thrilled with the way this whole project turned out, because that was awesome. So thank you so much for bringing that piece out. I want to talk a little bit about what you said with clear expectations and laying out the culture and then exemplifying it. I'm going to throw kind of an analogy out to you, and you let me know what you think about it here. When we write out these expectations and when we define who we are and what we're about and what we expect, right? To me, that's getting it in the head. At the end of the day, if you want culture to be believed and be executed, it's taking it to the heart. So it's taking it from the head to the heart. That's what I truly think of when I think of culture. And so give me a little bit of insight of, what does that process look like? Getting it from that clearly defined expectations and goals and values to the execution of, what's kind of in the middle there, because it's easy to say it on paper, but how do we make that a real thing?
I think the first step in that process is communicating it in a way that your audience hears you. And for instance, our athletes are going to hear, like, you could give them the same cue, but one kid's going to take it different than the next kid and then the next kid. And some kid, the first one might really, benefit from it, where the third kid still doesn't get it. It didn't hit home with them. So understanding, those who you're trying to communicate this with, what drives them. There's plenty of research that goes out about like the different types of motivators and ways people are driven. So it's your job to kind of figure out those people, what actually do they really value? And I think that takes a lot of work, because most of if you were to like have your athletes fill out a questionnaire at the beginning and you were to ask them, what drives you? They'd be like, not having to run, they'd say things like that. So, I think it's important to know it's important to communicate it in a 1,000 different ways so that everybody can actually take in that knowledge and have it in their head. Now, when it comes to it, I think that builds the bridge to getting it to the heart. If it actually means something to them, if you know what drives them, if you know what's important to them, then you're able to connect the dots between here's the knowledge, and then here's why it should really mean something to you. Here's why you should sacrifice so that this can happen, or here's why you should sacrifice and live this value daily, make decisions daily that align with this, because it's going to help you with your specific goal. It's going to help you with what means the most to you. And just the way it really just comes down to how you're going to communicate that information. Now, after it's been communicated and after you've built those relationships and kind of hopefully you've gotten it to the heart, that's where accountability comes in, because everybody makes mistakes. So even if they truly do, especially if you're like, who are you working with? For me, I'm working with college kids. They're always making mistakes. Like, of course they're going to make mistakes. I make mistakes. We all make mistakes. So but those mistakes have to be addressed. And like you said, like, you have to hold each other accountable. But what does accountability mean? That's another buzzword in itself. Just because you're holding somebody accountable doesn't mean that you're punishing them. It doesn't mean that you are in their face, making them feel bad, being demeaning. There's a difference between being demanding and being demeaning. And part of being really demanding is holding people to a high standard. And when they mess up, it's addressed. So you go and you talk to them, you have a conversation. And God says you address these problems at first one-on-one. And you don't have to, you don't have to go in front of the whole group of people and be like, hey, this person made a mistake, blah, 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 blah. First, address it with them one-on-one. Hey, look, why did you do this? Why did you make this decision? Here's how it negatively affected us, et cetera, et cetera. Then maybe you say, hey, I'd really like to bring this up to the rest of the group, because I think everybody would benefit from this lesson that you learned from failing. And you allow them, you let them know that that their failure is positively affecting the group. It is a positive thing for the rest of the group so that nobody else has to make those mistakes. And if you're really invested, if that person is really invested in the group, it's like their secret sauce. Like, this is my secret sauce. And if I want us to be really, really great, I'm going to share my secret sauce with my teammates, because then we're all working on the secret sauce. So in that, now that within itself, you're teaching leadership right then and there. Hey, let these people see your failure so that they don't make those same mistakes. And I will give a shout out to my family here, because I'm the youngest of 5 kids. And I've still made a ton of mistakes, don't get me wrong, but I experienced a lot of failure because my parents and my brothers and sisters went through it first, and I saw them experience it firsthand. And not that they sat me down and they said, "Look here, Becca, here's the lesson to be learned." Not that they did that, but I was with them daily, and I walked through that process with them. And the more I mature in my leadership, I start to reflect on some of those experiences I had with them. And I'm like, oh, I've seen that before. This is how we can learn from that. So, summarizing, sorry about that. Communicate in a way that they will hear you and understand you, and then hold accountable. And it has to be daily, and everybody has to be held to the same standards. You can't have special standards for said person because they're producing, more money, or they're, making really great plays. Everybody has to be held to the same standard, and it has to be held consistently. There cannot be exceptions here, there, and the other place, because otherwise it's like, that they're kind of, the athletes walk in like, oh, I wonder if she'll catch, or I wonder if she'll hold me accountable this time. And then where's the trust? They have to be able to trust that you're going to hold them accountable every time.
100%. And at the end of the day, the main takeaways that I hope everybody hears from this is that culture, like leadership, is a daily decision, and it is something that has to be watered, and it has to be continuously tuned up and continue to be worked on from different angles. It is never a finished product. Culture is never a finished product. Leadership is never a finished product, but your culture will be a reflection of your leadership. At the end of the day, your leadership and your values of your organization will be reflected in your culture. So for those of you guys that are taking over a new organization or looking to change an organization, make sure your values are what you want reflected, and then work on it daily, because whether it's good or bad, it's going to come out in the wash, and it's going to be seen. So figure out, who you are, what you're about, what your organization is going to be about, and then work on that daily. So Coach, we'll finish up here. I don't want to keep you too long. I know you're a busy lady and you're enjoying the limited time off that strength coaches have. So we'll hit you with some wild cards here, quick hitters. I just want first thing that pops to your mind. So first one here, what does the word legacy mean to you, and what do you want your legacy to be?
My definition of legacy really comes from what I learned it to mean at the Citadel. And your legacy, I see it as my last name. I see it, the name that's on the back of your jersey, like that's who you represent. And so what do I want my legacy to be? I want my life and my legacy to be a reflection of God. Of course, I want my last name, that first thought process. I want to represent, my parents and my brothers and sisters. And that's like, of course, I want to represent them well. I want people to see me and be like, man, her parents raised her right. I want people to see that. And then when I took on my husband's name, I want people to, the way I live my life, I want people to be like, man, like they must be, work together great, and like just be a great reflection on him and on his family, because now that's a new responsibility for me. I want to represent his parents and his brother. Like I want to represent them really, really well. But at the end of the day, I want the way I live my life to be a reflection of my faith in God. And I want to see everybody in heaven someday. So I want my life and my legacy to point people towards God's words. I can see everybody in heaven someday.
Love it. Love it. Next one. What's the best piece of leadership advice you've ever received?
This is a hard one. Obviously, with all the stuff that's out there about leadership and that we've talked about even in just these 3 episodes. Um, but when I really, really sat down and thought about it, it brought me back to not something that somebody said to me, but it was written on a note. When I was a sophomore in high school, um, I did not make the varsity basketball team, and I was extremely upset about it because my freshman year I had made JV, and I did really, really well on that JV team, and I fully expected to make varsity my sophomore year. And all of my teammates made varsity that next year except for me. They kept me on the JV team, and so I had to get used to playing with a whole new group of people, and I was upset about it. I was so mad. And I went into that head coach and I said, Coach, I was really expecting to make varsity this year. Why? What do I need to work on to be ready to play on that varsity team to make that varsity? And he said, okay. He's like, let me think about it and I'll write down some things and get it to you. I said, okay. It was like, that was at the beginning of the day. That was before school. After like my third class of the day, he calls my name over the intercom and I go into his classroom and he hands me like this little like scrap piece of paper. Like it's not even like it was like this big extravagant. It was just a little scrappy piece of paper with like 3 little handwritten notes on it. And he didn't expand on it. He just gave it. He said, here, take this and work on these things. I said, okay, thank you. Took it and left. Didn't look at it till later that day. But on that piece of paper, he wrote that I was selfish. And I could not believe it. I'm like, the nerve that he has to call me selfish. I'm the only one that's in there. I'm shooting free throws extra. I'm practicing like crazy. I'm always in shape. I'm the only one in the weight room. Like, how dare he? Like, I don't understand. I'm not even that good at ball handling. So it's not like I can be a ball hog. Like, I don't know. I'm like, I don't understand this. And at the end of the day, it took me a long time to go in and ask him to expand on it because I was so mad. And at the end of the day, this is what he meant. He said, don't be selfish, bring people with you. If you are doing all the right things, but you aren't bringing anybody with you, it's selfish. And that's hard. That is, I still get goosebumps thinking about it because I just remember that feeling, that kind of light bulb going off. But it still stands true to this day. If I get mad about people around me not doing the right thing, and I'm like, well, I'm doing my job. If I'm not bringing anybody with me, that's selfish. And I don't want to be selfish. I'm supposed to be servant leader here. Okay. I can't be doing that. So best piece of leadership advice came from my high school basketball coach. Don't be selfish. Bring people with you.
That's awesome. That's an awesome story. It's an awesome story. It's crazy how things that happen in your youth kind of shape who you are. I had a similar one that I talked about on a previous podcast where I was a 3-year starter on a very good high school team, and was expecting to be a captain. We had the vote, and I got called to the coach's office, and I thought I was going to be a captain. I thought he was going to tell me that I was a captain. I walked in, and he said, "Did you vote for yourself?" I said, "No." And he said, "Well, you're not a captain. Do you want to change your vote?" And I said, "No." And whatever. We had a conversation that stemmed from that. But it's crazy how those types of experiences at between the age of 15 to 18 can mold so much later in life and can come back and you look back on it now and you look at it and you learn the lesson and you're like, no, there it is again. Okay. It's just the world reaffirming like, hey, you forgot about this for a second. Remember this. So that's awesome, Coach. I appreciate you sharing that. Last one here. If you weren't doing what you're doing, so if you weren't a strength coach, where would you be? What would you be doing?
I'm sure I would be teaching or coaching in some way, shape, or form because that's what I enjoy doing. And it's like no matter what I do, like even when I was working at Subway, I was always like trying to teach people how to do things better. It's probably not always, like people didn't always probably enjoy that, but I would probably be teaching or coaching somewhere, but definitely closer to family. Like I would definitely be somewhere where I could help coach or teach my own nieces and nephews.
I love it. Well, Coach, this has been absolutely awesome. Again, telling the listeners, please go back, listen to 1 and 2, listen to part 3, take notes, take this stuff in because this is a phenomenal resource, and the fact that we have this much content for free is not out there a lot of places. To be able to hear, some of the topics that we talked about and went in depth with, this could have been a 10 part series easily. We could have kept going. So, Coach, I can't thank you enough. We're going to work on some things in the future here with Coach Gold. We're going to hopefully get some guest blogs from her. We're going to work on putting together a leadership library. So there's a lot of exciting stuff coming out with Coach Gold, working with Edge Leadership Academy. We're hugely, hugely grateful for her to be a part of this. Coach, if you want to plug your own social media, if you want to plug anything that you have going on, you don't have to, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, or whatever you want to throw out there for people if they want to get in touch, ask you questions about this stuff. I'll give you the mic here, and then we'll close this thing out.
Sure. Okay. So I don't put a ton of stuff on social media, but I do follow a lot of very educational people on social media. That's pretty much what I use it for. So if you follow me, look at who I'm following and start following those people. So my Twitter is at SITTIG97. And then my Instagram is coach_bgold. So I would say not that I'm putting a ton of stuff out there, but follow who I'm following because there's good stuff.
I love it.
And then feel free to email me. If you go on to the North Texas Strength Conditioning website, you can find my email right there.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, Coach, this has been awesome. It's been phenomenal. Can't thank you enough. I'm sure we'll have you on in the future. Looking forward to continuing this relationship here and keep building stuff and keep trying to put out more resources for people to continue to grow. Again, at the end of the day, this whole project, the Built Not Born podcast and Edge Leadership Academy, is completely fundamentally rooted in adding value to other people and adding value to organizations and giving people access to knowledge that I wish I had and resources that I wish I had when I was growing in my leadership skills. And you are definitely one of those resources. So, Coach, looking forward to talking again. And thank you for being on.
Thank you, Coach. I appreciate the opportunity.
That was part 3 with Coach Rebekah Gold from the University of North Texas. Once again, Coach Gold over-delivered, bringing up some great points about not getting distracted, managing when you should be leading, learning to understand the relationship between culture and leadership within your environment, and how there's multiple cultures within each organization, but they should all reflect your values. Again, Coach has just been an awesome resource for us for these past 3 episodes, so we appreciate her a ton. Hope you guys enjoyed it as much as we did. Please feel free, reach out if you guys have questions. We plugged her social media. We'll also make sure that stuff is in the show notes. And as always, please like, share, leave a review, subscribe to the podcast so that we can continue this mission of bringing you guys high-quality conversations with high-quality people. And as always, leaders are built, not born.